I stood at attention in his office 2 weeks before the escape, and when the commanding officer smiled and told me my report had been misplaced, I knew he thought he'd already won. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, just leaned back in his chair and mentioned that my service record now showed a pattern of insubordination. The word hung there, deliberate and heavy. I kept my eyes forward. My hands stayed at my sides. Because 6 minutes earlier, during a routine maintenance inspection when he'd left his office unlocked, I'd already photographed 3 pages of his ledger. He had no idea I was hunting him. Let me rewind. 3 weeks before that moment, the crash investigation had just closed. The pilot's aircraft went down hard. Hydraulic failure. The kind that doesn't give you time to think, let alone eject. When I traced the part number on the failed component, I found something that made my stomach drop. It was counterfeit. Cheap metal stamped with the right codes but built to fail. And every supply invoice that approved those parts bore the same set of initials. His initials. I reported it. That was my first mistake, or maybe my only honest choice. Within 48 hours, local police showed up at my adult son's apartment with a warrant. Theft of military equipment. Someone had planted stolen gear in his car. Someone with enough rank to make a phone call and turn a fabrication into an arrest. The commanding officer didn't need to say it out loud. The message was clear. Drop the investigation or watch your son go to prison. I didn't drop it. I got smarter. They placed me in pretrial confinement 3 days later. Flight risk, they said, pending court-martial for the same insubordination he'd just smiled about. But here's what they didn't know. I'd spent the week before my arrest mapping his office, his schedule, the exact location of that ledger, the sensor blind spots in the perimeter fence, the storm drain access point that maintenance had flagged but never fixed, the precise timing of the evening guard shift change. I wasn't panicking. I was preparing. You want to know what kept me calm in that cell? It wasn't hope. It was the knowledge that arrogance makes people sloppy. He thought locking me up would end the problem. He thought I'd fold. He thought wrong. The first red flag had come months earlier, long before the crash. A supply sergeant mentioned an invoice mismatch during a budget review. Nothing dramatic, just numbers that didn't line up. I filed it away. The second flag was the way he dismissed my maintenance report on the fence sensors. Too quick, too casual, like he didn't want anyone looking too closely at the perimeter. The third was the unlocked office. 6 minutes. Most people would call that luck. I called it a pattern. He was comfortable. Comfortable people get careless. The night I escaped, I didn't improvise. I followed the plan I'd built in my head during every hour of confinement. The storm drain tunnel ran beneath the northwest corner of the base, right where the fence sensors had been flagged for repair 2 months prior. I waited until 2200 hours. Shift change. The guards rotated clockwise. That gave me a 4-minute window where the northwest perimeter had no eyes on it. I crawled through that tunnel in the dark. Concrete walls slick with runoff, the smell of rust and standing water. I came up inside the fence line, moved along the tree shadow to the admin building, and entered through the side door I'd left propped with a folded gum wrapper during my last shift before confinement. No alarms, no shouts, just silence and the sound of my own breathing. His office was exactly as I'd left it. The ledger sat in the second drawer of his desk, right side, beneath a stack of personnel files. I pulled it out, set it under his own desk lamp, and photographed every single page. Every transaction, every approval, every counterfeit part traced back to a shell company that funneled kickbacks into an account I'd already cross-referenced with his financial disclosures. I didn't rush. Rushing gets you caught. When I finished, I replaced the ledger exactly where I'd found it. Same angle. Same stack of files on top. I wiped the drawer handle. I left through the same side door, retraced my steps to the tunnel, and made it back outside the fence before the next patrol sweep. Then I did something he would never expect. I confessed. I uploaded every photograph to a secure server, wrote a full timeline of my escape, and sent it all to the Inspector General with a subject line that read, "Confession and evidence of fraud." I didn't hide. I didn't run. I laid out every step I'd taken, every rule I'd broken, and every piece of proof that showed why I'd done it. Transparency became my defense. Honesty became my weapon. The commanding officer was arrested before he finished his morning coffee. Two military investigators walked into his office at 0630, and by the time he thought to check the ledger, it was already in evidence lockup. He never knew I'd touched it. He never suspected I'd been inside his office while he slept, confident and comfortable in his rank. Arrogance assumes no one is watching. Discipline ensures someone always is. Within a week, my court-martial was dismissed. The charges against my son were dropped. The Inspector General's office issued a formal apology and a quiet notation in my file that the confinement had been based on fraudulent evidence. They didn't make a big show of it. The military doesn't like admitting it got played from the inside. But I didn't need a ceremony. I needed my son safe. I needed the pilot's family to know the truth. I needed the system to remember that rank doesn't make you untouchable. The first morning after my release, I stood in front of the mirror in my quarters and pinned the locket back onto my dress uniform. My son had given it to me years ago, before his first deployment. I'd kept it in my locker during confinement because they wouldn't let me wear it. The weight of it felt familiar, earned. It reminded me that preparation, not desperation, wins wars. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat. I just got back to work. You might be wondering if it was worth it, the risk, the tunnel, the photographs in the dark, the confession that could have ended my career even if the evidence cleared me. Here's what I learned. The moment you realize someone is using the system as a weapon, you have two choices. You can comply and hope mercy finds you, or you can become more disciplined than they are arrogant. I chose discipline. The commanding officer had built his scheme on the assumption that no one would dare challenge him, that rank equaled immunity, that a single master sergeant with a son in jeopardy would fold under pressure. He was half right. I was under pressure. But pressure doesn't break you if you've already decided what you're willing to lose. And I wasn't willing to lose my son. The hardest part wasn't the escape. It wasn't even the photographs. It was the week before my arrest, when I had to act normal, smile at the right moments, follow orders, pretend I didn't know what was coming. Every conversation felt like a test. Every glance from him felt like a dare. But I stayed calm, I stayed sharp, because the second you show fear, you give them permission to believe they've won. He thought I was powerless. I let him think it. The ledger told a story he'd written in his own hand. Shell companies with addresses that didn't exist, parts approved without proper testing, kickbacks disguised as consulting fees. It wasn't sophisticated. It was just protected by rank and routine. No one had bothered to look because no one thought they needed to, until someone died. That pilot had a family, a career, a future. And he lost it all because someone decided profit mattered more than safety. When I reported the counterfeit parts, I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was doing my job. But doing your job becomes an act of defiance when the system is rigged. So I rigged it back. The night I sent that email to the Inspector General, I didn't sleep. I sat in a diner 3 towns over, drinking bad coffee and waiting for the sun to come up. I knew what I'd done. I knew the consequences if the evidence wasn't enough. But I also knew I'd done everything right. I'd documented every step. I'd kept every receipt. I'd given them no room to twist the narrative. And when the call came through that he'd been arrested, I didn't feel relief. I felt tired. The kind of tired that comes from holding your breath for weeks and finally being allowed to exhale. Justice doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes It just feels like the end of a fight you never wanted to start. The locket sits on my uniform now, same place it always did. A small silver oval with a photo inside that's faded from years of handling. My son doesn't know the full story yet. He knows the charges were dropped. He knows I was cleared. But he doesn't know about the tunnel or the photographs or the 4 minutes I had to cross that perimeter without being seen. Maybe I'll tell him one day. Or maybe I'll let him believe the system worked the way it's supposed to. Either way, he's safe. That's all that matters. Here's the truth no one tells you. Doing the right thing doesn't guarantee a happy ending. It doesn't guarantee you'll be believed, or protected, or even thanked. What it guarantees is that you'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror and know you didn't fold when it mattered. And some days, that's enough. So I'll ask you this. What would you risk to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves? How far would you go if the system turned its back and the only person left to fight was you? I'm not saying you should break the rules. I'm saying you should know which rules were written to protect power instead of people. Because the moment you see that difference, you'll understand why I crawled through that tunnel in the dark. If you've ever faced a choice between compliance and courage, or if you've ever wondered whether one person can actually make a difference when the deck is stacked, I'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. Let's talk about what it takes to stand your ground when standing costs everything.